April 7th, 2026. That was the day the world genuinely held its breath. The United States and Iran, they were right on the verge of a war that threatened to pull everyone and everything into a global catastrophe. So, let's get into it. Let's unpack how we got to the very edge of the abyss and what exactly happened in those critical days that followed.
This wasn't some vague threat you could just brush off. This was a direct promise, posted on social media for the entire world to see from the most powerful man on the planet. The message couldn't have been clearer: total destruction. You can just imagine leaders everywhere scrambling, wondering, is this it? Is this the moment before a nuclear strike?
It's the one question that was on everybody's mind, right? How could things escalate so incredibly fast that the complete annihilation of an entire country was actually on the table? Well, to understand that threat, we first have to understand the human cost of the conflict that was already well underway.
So before that final ultimatum was ever issued, a pretty brutal war had already been raging for more than 50 days. And the human toll, it was absolutely staggering. This wasn't some far-off conflict you see on the news. For thousands of families, this was a devastating, everyday reality.
Just look at this number: over 4,000 people killed in just a month and a half. That's more than 2,000 in Iran, over 2,100 in Lebanon, and dozens of Israeli and American soldiers too. And behind that number, you've got entire communities just shattered. Every single digit represents a life cut short, a family torn apart, and millions, literally millions, forced to flee their homes.
Okay, so here's the crucial thing to understand. This didn't just happen overnight. The path from day one of the war to that world-ending threat, it was paved with a series of really rapid, really dangerous escalations. There were a few key moments that just kept pushing both sides closer and closer to the edge. Let's walk through exactly how it all unfolded.
It all kicks off on February 28th. Then, just 3 weeks later, the conflict takes a terrifying turn when Iran's Natanz nuclear facility is attacked. Then, boom! On April 3rd, Iran shows what it can do, dealing a pretty big blow by shooting down a very sophisticated American fighter jet. See? Each event was another step up the ladder of escalation, leading directly to April 7th, the day President Trump delivered that final, terrifying ultimatum.
Now, what's really scary about all this is the targeting of nuclear facilities. The attack on Natanz was dangerous enough, but 4 bombs also landed near the Bushehr nuclear power plant. That's Iran's only functioning plant. If that had been hit, the radioactive fallout would have contaminated the entire Gulf, poisoning the water and creating a disaster that would last for generations. We're talking Chernobyl-level bad.
This quote from Qatar's prime minister from the year before just perfectly captures the stakes. A direct hit on Bushehr wouldn't just be an act of war, it would have been an act of regional suicide. It would render a vital body of water completely lifeless. And it just goes to show you the razor's edge the world was really on.
So right in the middle of all this nuclear brinkmanship, a single event on April 3rd became a huge turning point. It's the story of survival, a high-stakes covert mission that directly challenged the official story we were all hearing out of Washington.
This was the message President Trump was projecting to the entire world, that the U.S. had total control of the air, that Iran was defeated, that the war was, for all intents and purposes, over. It was this really confident, crystal-clear declaration of victory.
And then, this happened. Reality came crashing into that victory narrative. An F-15E, one of America's best fighter jets, was shot out of the sky over enemy territory. Both crew members ejected, and they landed deep inside Iran, kicking off this desperate race against the clock.
The mission to save that second crew member, a weapons systems officer, was literally something out of a movie. First, you have the CIA launching this whole deception campaign, spreading rumors that the crew was already safe just to get the Iranian search parties to back off. Then, once they located the officer hiding at 7,000 feet, they send in the elite, Delta Force and Navy SEALs, using diversionary airstrikes as cover to go in and pull him out.
2 days later, on April 5th, President Trump announced the mission was a success. "We got him," he posted. He claimed the rescue was flawless, that it was done without any damage, and then used it as even more proof of America's total control of the skies.
But the truth? Well, it was a lot messier. Yes, the airman was saved, but the operation came at a really heavy price. An A-10 Warthog actually crashed. Multiple rescue helicopters and transport planes were hit by Iranian fire. And to stop their advanced tech from falling into enemy hands, the U.S. military literally had to destroy its own damaged aircraft on Iranian soil. So that no damage claim?
Yeah, that just wasn't true.
So, with the military situation being way more complicated than it seemed, and the world just staring down the barrel of Trump's deadline, the focus suddenly shifted. It went from the battlefield to the negotiating table. Diplomacy made this shocking, last-minute comeback.
In a twist that absolutely no one saw coming, just an hour and a half before U.S. strikes were supposed to begin, a ceasefire was announced. And the mediator wasn't who you'd expect. It was Pakistan, which had apparently opened up a secret direct channel to President Trump. The entire world just let out a collective sigh of relief, but it didn't last long.
The two sides met in Islamabad for peace talks, but after 21 hours, the whole thing just collapsed. And here's why. It came down to this fundamental disagreement that they just couldn't get past. The U.S. was demanding the complete, permanent dismantlement of Iran's entire nuclear program. Iran, on the other hand, was only willing to hit pause for 5 years. There was just no middle ground to be found.
And what happened next was just pure chaos. On April 12th, with diplomacy dead in the water, the U.S. responded with a full naval blockade of Iran. Then, 5 days later, in this really confusing move, Iran suddenly declared that the critical Strait of Hormuz was open for business. But then, just 24 hours later, they did a complete 180, shut it down again, and started firing on commercial ships. It was just this period of complete and unpredictable craziness.
And that brings us right up to the present moment in this crisis, April 21st, 2026. The world has taken a step back from the immediate edge, sure, but the situation is still unbelievably fragile, with all these different flashpoints just ready to explode at any moment.
So this is where things stand right now. That fragile 2-week ceasefire, it's set to expire in less than 24 hours. The American naval blockade is still choking off Iranian ports, the Strait of Hormuz is basically a powder keg, and oh yeah, there's a whole separate delicate ceasefire holding between Israel and Lebanon. But its future is just as uncertain as everything else.
The clock is ticking down, again. The diplomatic path has failed, the military options are all just catastrophic, and all the major players are completely locked into their positions. It leaves all of us with the ultimate, really unsettling question. After coming so close to the end, what on earth happens now?